Greetings everybody, I'm Commander Great, CG for short, and today I'm going to be watching and ranking every single Pixar movie. That's right, every single one, from Toy Story all the way up to Elemental. I know Inside Out 2 is coming out soon, but I'm hoping to get this video done before the release of that movie. But if I don't, then you're completely free to unsubscribe from my channel. I totally get it. So, without further ado, let's start the ranking. What do you guys say?
I don't want to be here.
What's a Pixar?
This is not very productive.
Motherfucker.
Wally, where did you learn that kind of language?
Suburb over there.
Yes, little walrus. Cars, cars.
I'm you, from the future.
Lightyear is genuinely one of the most generic animated movies I have ever seen. And that's saying a lot because I've seen Monster Family.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
Now, the idea of this movie is actually pretty interesting, being that it's supposed to be the movie that Andy supposedly saw in theaters that made him want a Buzz Lightyear toy in the first Toy Story movie. It's genuinely a pretty interesting concept, and when that first initial teaser for it came out, it did spark my interest quite a bit. But now, after finally watching the actual movie, yeah, there's really not much to like here. For such an interesting concept, it is the most dull and uninteresting Pixar movie I have ever seen. The plot is predictable, the characters are all really generic, and it's overall just really boring, which is the worst crime that a movie can commit in my eyes. While yes, there are many other bad Pixar movies, such as Cars 2, Cars 2 at least has the quality of being entertaining, even if the entire movie falls apart if you think about it for more than 5 seconds. This movie, on the other hand, is just boring and not that fun to watch, but it really shouldn't be. A fun, animated sci-fi movie about Buzz Lightyear sounds like the easiest movie to get right. I mean, you already have the old Buzz Lightyear movie and cartoon from the 90s to draw inspiration from. But I don't know what happened behind the scenes because this is nothing like what I imagined the movie that Buzz Lightyear is based on would be like. It's also just kinda depressing to watch. It deals with a bunch of time travel stuff, with Buzz slowly watching everyone around him die, and for the entire movie, Buzz just has this guilt on him, and it's just not fun to watch at all. And the crew he teams up with are some of the most generic cookie-cutter characters I have ever seen. We've got the quirky girl who just wants everyone to work together as a team, but sometimes she messes up, but it's okay because it was just a mistake. We've got the old lady who's actually secretly a badass, who seems like she hates everyone around her, but she really just cares about the team deep down. And who could forget about the silly guy voiced by Taika Waititi who says all the quippy one-liners? Aren't they all so silly and fun? Don't you want to buy merchandise? Honestly, the only likable character in this movie is the robot cat Socks. Unlike the other characters, he actually manages to be funny, probably because his dialogue doesn't sound like bad MCU quips like the other characters. Honestly, the movie as a whole just feels like a bad MCU movie. The signature Pixar style is barely here at all. It's just kind of a generic sci-fi movie and nothing really beyond that. And that twist with Zurg, man. It's probably the stupidest plot twist I've ever seen in a movie. So, get this. Turns out Zurg is actually Buzz from the future. What? This is genuinely some of the worst writing I've ever seen in a movie. Robots can't say Buzz, so they just say Zurg. Might be one of the worst movie lines I've ever heard. Yes, even worse than somehow Palpatine returned. The only real redeeming quality of this movie is the animation, but even then, while the movement and textures look beautiful as always, the world and environments are just kinda generic. I mean, this is supposed to be a strange alien world, but all we get is, what, some vines and some bugs? God, this movie sucks at everything it does. Literally, just go watch the old Buzz Lightyear movie from the 90s, and you'll have a much better experience than watching this piece of hot trash.
Yeah, I agree with CG. That movie sucked. It wasn't even realistic. If Buzz really went hyperspeed, he would have no-clipped into the third world, and he would have met the Great Gaffermite, who would have stretched his skin through 7 different dimensions.
Excuse me? The Great Gaffer what now?
You guys don't know what the Great Gaffermite is? Damn, your civilization is really primitive.
The Great Gaffermite is what your planet would refer to as God.
Whoa, that's actually really fascinating. Please tell me more.
Would you guys shut up? We're doing a Pixar ranking here.
But CG, I want to learn more about...
No, we're doing the Pixar ranking, and that's final!
Yes, sir. You got a friend in me. The Good Dinosaur is another one of those Pixar movies that don't really feel like Pixar movies. I mean, it's definitely more of a Pixar movie than Lightyear is, but it still lacks that signature Pixar charm. The plot of the movie follows this dinosaur named Arlo, who after losing his dad, gets swept away in a flood and has to find his way back home together with this human named Spot, who acts like a dog for some reason. Throughout their adventure, they encounter many different obstacles and wacky characters, and it's kind of less of a movie and more of just a series of events. It is a very simple plot, and that would be excusable if the characters were the least bit interesting, which they are not. The main character, Arlo, is just kind of your standard whiny kid who needs to learn to be brave, and Spot just kind of acts like a dog for the entire movie, so you don't really learn much about him either. It's just kind of your standard kids movie, but even then, I'm not even sure a kid would enjoy it just because of how unnecessarily dark it is. I mean, in the first 20 minutes, the main character's dad fucking dies, and throughout the movie, it's just kind of filled with imagery that's just kind of horrific, especially for a movie that's supposed to be aimed at little kids. But I still wouldn't call the movie anything horrible or outrageously offensive. It's just very generic, especially coming from Pixar. I mean, this movie is still leagues better than the train wreck that is Lightyear, I'll give it that. Its heart is in the right place, and it's got some absolutely beautiful animation, but for Pixar, yeah, I kind of expect a bit more.
Oh yeah, Big Buster, I'm done. Did it again. Found me another grail.
Cars 2! Oh boy, Cars 2. Cars 2 is definitely the movie that most people think about when bad Pixar movies are brought up. And what do I think of it? Yeah, it's pretty bad. The whole concept of this movie just makes no sense to me. We have this first movie that had a relatively simple plot. A selfish, cocky race car learns to be kinder to the people around him and learns to slow down. Easy, simple, it's a good story. But for the second movie, they decided to go with this complicated spy story focused on Mater, who was a side character in the first movie who is now the main character, who gets involved with these secret spies who think Mater is just acting dumb to fool the bad guys, but is in reality actually dumb, and wait, what does this have to do with Cars again? Yeah, the main problem with this movie is that it doesn't really have a reason to be a Cars sequel. The plot of the movie easily could have been reworked to be just a regular animated spy movie with humans. And doesn't that sound infinitely more interesting than this? A spy movie made by Pixar sounds like it would be the most awesome thing ever, but for some reason, it's a Cars sequel, which just makes no sense because the first movie didn't even have anything to do with spies. And Lightning McQueen isn't even the main character anymore. Instead, we follow Mater. And listen, I like Mater in the first movie, but there's a reason he was a side character, because he really doesn't work as a main character. This is just way too much Mater. After a while, you just kind of get tired of hearing his voice, and the decisions he makes in this movie are just frustrating more than anything, and it just ends up making him very annoying and unlikable. It also has a similar issue to The Good Dinosaur, where the tone is very inconsistent. One minute it'll be a fun racing movie for kids, and the other minute we'll see cars getting fucking crushed and blown up. Like, look at this! That car is fucking dead! He had a wife and kids at home! Finn McMissile is responsible for those kids growing up without a father now! You're a monster, Finn! You killed him, and you're smiling! You're fucking smiling! It is unnecessarily dark in some scenes, to the point that if this movie wasn't about cars, it probably would have gotten a PG-13 rating or even an R. But no, this movie is rated G! G! That's the same rating as the Winnie the Pooh movies! This is probably the highest body count I've ever seen in a G-rated movie, and it just kind of makes you wonder who this movie is even for. Now, the movie isn't a complete train wreck, because there are parts of it that are actually pretty fun. When it does show lightning in the racing scenes throughout the movie, it does get pretty engaging, and it's the only parts of the movie where it actually feels like the first Cars movie. Also, Francesco is the best character in the movie. I will defend him till the day I die. I love him so much. The action is also surprisingly very well done. For being a movie where all the characters are cars, the action scenes do get very engaging, especially that opening scene at the oil rig. It is just such an awesome scene, especially paired with the amazing soundtrack. I'm telling you, the soundtrack of this movie is so underrated. It's some genuinely good stuff. But overall, this movie is just a mess. Even Pixar knows it, because in the third movie, they have pretty much no references to the second movie at all, and Mater's role in that movie is cut down significantly.
Would you be scared if you see the fish in the water? I would be scared if I see the fish swimming around.
Finding Dory has that same problem that Cars 2 has, being that it's a sequel to a previous Pixar movie that takes a side character from that first movie and makes them the main character. And yeah, it really doesn't work here either. I mean, I'd still take Dory over Mater any day, but I still don't think she's strong enough to carry an entire movie. Dory was fine in the first Finding Nemo. She could have some funny lines every now and then, but I didn't really love her or anything. So you can imagine how a whole movie only focused on her isn't really my cup of tea. Here we follow Dory, everyone's favorite Ellen DeGeneres fish, as she tries to find her long-lost parents together with Marlin and Nemo. Throughout their adventure, they encounter many obstacles, wacky characters, new locations, and... come on, you've all seen this stuff before. The movie relies a little too heavily on generic kids movie tropes for me. Every now and then there will be emotional scenes that do remind you that this is made by Pixar, but as a whole, the movie just kind of feels like a mid-tier DreamWorks movie. The whole movie just feels like it shouldn't exist. Like, was anyone really clamoring for the story of Finding Nemo to be continued? I sure wasn't. But for a movie that clearly just exists to make money, it's serviceable enough. I find some of the new characters pretty fun. That octopus that Dory befriends specifically is a really charming character, and his animation is really well done. They really went all out on him. The new locations are also very fun. The aquarium is just gorgeous to look at, and it really feels like an appropriate extension of the first movie's world. But, like, overall, I just can't get into this movie. I know it's got a lot of fans, but to me, it was just kind of a generic kids movie.
I say whoever threw that paper, your mom's up.
Brave is kind of a mixed bag for me. While there are things in this movie that I absolutely adore, there are also some things that are just really frustrating, and you can really tell it had a very rocky development. Let's start with the good. First of all, the character of Merida is really one of the more likable Disney princesses out there. You can really relate to her feelings of wanting to be independent, and when you see all the pressure her mom is putting on her, it really makes you feel bad for her. Yes, I know it's a trope that's been done in 1,000 other movies before, but I think it's really done well here. I also love the way they make her strong without having it feel forced, especially in that archery scene. The way she shoots that arrow through the other arrow is just so fucking cool. It's definitely one of my favorite scenes in the movie. The relationship she has with her mom is definitely the strongest part of the movie, with her mom wanting her to follow tradition and Merida just wanting to live her own life and be free. And what I love is that they don't make her mom's intentions seem evil or anything. She genuinely cares about her daughter, and even when she does do bad things, such as throw Merida's bow in the fire, they show her immediately regretting it afterwards, showing that even though she can lash out and get mad, she really just cares about her daughter and wants the best for her, and you can really see where both of them are coming from. But yeah, even I have to admit, after she gets turned into a bear, the movie kinda takes a nosedive. The best part of Merida and her mom's relationship was just listening to them talk to each other. And when her mom can only make bear noises and they can't communicate as much, you kinda lose a big part of their relationship. There's also some really stupid scenes at parts, such as that one scene where her mom is sneaking around the castle completely exposed to a bunch of people and no one notices her. Like, how is it that no one notices the giant bear sneaking around? I'm also really not a fan of all these stupid side characters that show up. They serve pretty much zero purpose to the actual plot and are just kind of there to be comic reliefs, but I just kind of found them annoying more than anything. So overall, I'd say Brave is just kind of okay. Don't get me wrong, it's not a horrible movie, I wouldn't even call it bad. It's just a movie that clearly had potential to be a lot greater than it ended up being.
I like the word moist, okay?
Elemental sure is a movie. At the time of writing this script, this is the most recent Pixar movie to come out, and I haven't really seen people talk about it that much. Sure, when it came out, people made reviews on it and talked about it on Twitter, but now it seems like people have mostly forgotten about this movie. And yeah, I'd say there's a pretty good reason for that. This movie is incredibly generic. It's pretty much just every generic love story you've ever seen, just with elements instead of people. And these elements really aren't that interesting. The movie takes place in a world inhabited by creatures made up with different elements, such as wind, earth, water, and fire. The main character is this fire girl named Ember, who after stumbling across this water guy named Wade, slowly starts to fall in love with him. However, she has to keep it a secret from her family, because elements don't mix, and a fire girl can't be with a water boy, and... yeah, it's all just really generic. You've seen this story a million times. You know they're not gonna get along at first and then fall in love, and at the start the parents won't accept it, but at the end of the movie they'll change their minds. It's all been done a million times before, and they don't really do anything new or interesting in here besides just being elements. And even with that, the romance doesn't even feel necessarily earned, because these two characters really don't feel compatible at all, and the romance is just really forced. Now, the movie isn't all bad. For example, I did really enjoy the whole culture the fire people have. The whole story of Ember's parents needing to move away from their home and into the Element City, and how they have this cute little shop and how you can tell they're from a different culture, I really loved. They also get really creative with how all the elements interact with the environment and the other elements, like how the fire people can't touch water or how the water people can just turn into pure liquid. I really liked all that stuff, and I really do wish they did more of that stuff throughout the movie. The look of the movie is also absolutely stunning. The way they animate the different elements is so creatively done, and I really love the whole look of the Element City. Really reminded me a lot of Zootopia, which is always a plus in my book. So, while there's plenty of things to like about this movie, overall, I really didn't get into the romance of it, and when the whole movie focuses on that, yeah, it kind of falls apart.
Ants! Ants!
A Bug's Life is, to me, the most average movie Pixar has ever made. It's not anything horrible, but there isn't exactly anything in it that stands out too much, especially compared to Pixar's other movies. The plot is pretty simple. This ant named Flick is tasked with going out to search for warrior bugs to help his colony defend themselves from a group of grasshoppers. Instead, however, he finds a group of circus bugs, who he then takes back to his colony, unaware that they're not actually warrior bugs. It's not a horrible plot by any means, it just feels kinda standard. We have the outcast who doesn't really fit in, we have the comic reliefs, we have the liar reveal plotline, you've all seen this before. I also don't really think the character designs for the ants are all that strong. The other bugs in this movie are very well designed. They've all got unique designs and personalities that make them stand out, but for the ants, they all just kinda look the same. The only ones that have unique designs are the queen and princess ants, but everyone else just kinda looks the same. Not even the main character Flick stands out, and it leads to them easily melting into the crowd shots. This is actually something that I think the DreamWorks movie Ants did much better. There, each of the ants have a much more distinct character design, having much more sharp and angular shapes, which I think works much better, and it makes them stand out a lot more. Now, while I do have a lot of problems with this movie, I do think there are a lot of things to like about it too. First of all, the circus bugs. They're all really fun characters, and they really do manage to get a lot of laughs. Usually in movies like this, the comic relief characters can usually get pretty annoying, but I think they're done very well here. They're all very fun and likable, and it kind of makes me wish the entire movie was just about them. But my favorite character in this movie is without a doubt Hopper. He's the main antagonist of this story, and he is just a damn menace. He's very intimidating and threatening, but also very strategic, seemingly always being one step ahead of the other characters. I also really love that one scene where he's explaining to all the grasshoppers how ants are stronger together. It's really well done, and Kevin Spacey's performance as Hopper really enhances the scene. Which, makes sense because he's also a villain in real life.
Certified pedophile.
So his death scene is really well done, with him dying in a scene that's surprisingly pretty brutal, especially for a family film. So overall, while I don't think A Bug's Life is an amazing movie or anything, I'd still say it's got plenty of good things in it that it makes it worth checking out.
Yeah, Bug's Life is a pretty great movie. It shows us bugs are people too, and you should treat us with respect.
Ew, an ant!
The Incredibles 2. Now, this is one of those movies that people were asking to be made for years. The way the first Incredibles movie ended made it perfect for a sequel, and ever since that first movie came out, people had been clamoring for a sequel for years. And then in 2018, it finally came out. 15 years later. Yeah, they sure took their damn time with this movie. I mean, between the release of the first Incredibles movie and the sequel, we had 3 damn Cars movies. 3! So after so many years of waiting, was it worth it? Well... Okay, for starters, I really don't think this is a bad movie. There's plenty of things to like about it. It's still got all the characters we know and love, an absolutely amazing soundtrack, and incredibly gorgeous animation. Pun intended. Where the movie falls flat, however, is that the plot is just kind of the same as the first movie, but reversed, to now have Helen be the one doing all the action and Bob be the stay-at-home parent. It's not a bad plot by any means, but for a sequel that we waited so long for, it was kind of disappointing to see the plot just kind of be a rehash of the first movie. What I wanted was a sequel that advances the plot of the first movie and develops our characters more, like an Empire Strikes Back kind of sequel. This, though, is more of a Force Awakens type sequel, where things are just kinda switched around and presented as new. But at least that movie was supposed to take place 30 years after the original Star Wars movies. This one takes place directly after the first Incredibles movie, so it just kind of feels like we're taking a few steps back instead of forward, especially regarding Bob's character. He just feels like he lost all of the character development he had in the first movie. The twist villain is also really lame. Throughout the movie, the antagonist is this mysterious masked person named the Screenslaver, who wants to make superheroes illegal. We also meet this lady earlier in the movie whose parents were killed by robbers because the superheroes couldn't get to their house on time. Ooh, I wonder who the Screenslaver is. Yeah, this is definitely one of the lamer twist villains in a Pixar movie. I mean, if you think about it, her motivations don't even really make sense. The reason the heroes couldn't get to her parents' house on time was because superheroes had just been outlawed, so therefore she wants to have superheroes be outlawed again? Isn't that what killed your parents? Are you stupid? Now, while the movie doesn't really work as a sequel to The Incredibles, I do still think there's a lot to like about it. I think all the family stuff with Bob is pretty fun. These characters are just so strong that I could just watch an entire movie about them just living a regular family life and I'd be satisfied. All members of the family all get a chance to shine here, and that aspect is actually something I think this movie does a little bit better than the first movie. While the first movie is called The Incredibles, it's really Bob's story, and the rest of the characters are really just side characters, and they don't really get involved in the story until the second and third act. Here, though, much more focus is put on the actual family, and I really loved seeing Bob face all the troubles of just being a regular father. Those scenes could actually get pretty charming. So overall, I'd say The Incredibles 2 is kind of a mixed bag. It's definitely a fun movie. Hell, I'd say it has some elements in it that are done better than in the first movie, but overall, yeah, I do wish we got something a little better, especially after waiting so long for it.
Hug me, brother! Hug me, brother! Brother!
Onward is kind of a strange movie. It came out right at the start of the pandemic, so not a lot of people went to see it, but the people who did go see it said it was a relatively inoffensive little movie. Nothing too terrible and nothing too great either, just okay. And what did I think of it? Well, I actually thought it was a little better than just okay. Of course, it's not one of Pixar's best movies, but for what it is, I thought it was a very charming little movie. The movie takes place in this fantasy world where the people who inhabit it have abandoned magic for technology, making the world into this kind of mishmash between a fantasy world and the real world. We follow Ian, who on his 16th birthday is given this magic staff that came from his father, who passed away right before Ian was born. Ian uses the staff to try and bring back his dad from the dead. However, he only manages to bring back his legs, with him and his brother going on an adventure to try and find this gem that can bring back their entire dad before it's too late. It's a very simple premise, but I think it works really well. The dad legs are a very funny visual, and the funny little gags they do with him are very fun and creatively done, but they also have plenty of emotional scenes too, which is really impressive considering, well, it's a pair of legs. The way they animate the legs to express emotion through subtle movements is surprisingly effective, and it adds a lot of emotion to scenes that could have easily been played solely for laughs, which I really do appreciate. I also love the bond that Ian and his brother Barley have. Yes, they bicker and fight and disagree on a lot of things, but at the end of the day, they really do care for each other, and I really love how supportive Barley is of Ian. And that ending, man. It's absolutely the most powerful scene in the movie. I love the way you don't entirely get to see what's going on. Instead, you just see things happening in the distance, as if we're experiencing the moment through Ian's eyes, and I think doing it in this way makes for a much more powerful moment. It's sort of bittersweet in that way. Sure, it would have been nice if Ian did get to meet his father, but the fact that Barley did makes it all worth it in his eyes. So overall, while this movie isn't anything incredible, I'd still say it's a very charming movie. And that ending really makes the entire movie worth it in my eyes. It is a truly powerful scene.
3, that's a magic number.
Cars 3. Now, when the teaser for this movie came out, everyone lost their damn minds. It showed this sort of gritty and realistic version of the Cars world, where we see Lightning get into this huge crash with bits and parts of him flying all over the place. This teaser sent everyone speculating, what could this mean? Is Cars 3 gonna be a more gritty and serious take on the Cars franchise? Is this movie gonna be for adults? Is Lightning gonna die?
No.
Yeah, when this movie actually came out, it turned out to be just another Cars sequel. Don't get me wrong, the movie's not bad or anything, I just don't really see the reason why they advertised it like this. Kind of feels like false advertisement. I mean, yeah, the scene itself is in the actual movie, but it's not as dramatic or as gritty, so it just makes me wonder why they did the teaser like this in the first place. But if you look at the movie on its own, it's still a surprisingly good movie. Sure, it's not as great as the teaser made it out to be, but I still think it's a very solid movie. The movie follows Lightning McQueen as he realizes he's growing older and isn't at the top of his game anymore, with this new advanced race car named Jackson Storm coming along who proves to be much faster than Lightning. The movie after that is pretty much just an extended training montage, with Lightning teaming up with this trainer car named Cruz who he forms a bond with throughout the movie. The movie surprisingly deals with quite a lot of adult themes, such as growing old and realizing you're not at the top of your game anymore, with there being quite a lot of moments where the characters are just allowed to sit and just talk to each other, which I really did enjoy. And this movie does a much better job at paying tribute to Doc Hudson than the previous one. In Cars 2, Doc's death between movies was just kinda glanced over. However, here it's a major plot point and motivation for Lightning, and as someone who grew up with the first Cars movie, it really does hit hard. So yeah, I'd definitely say Cars 3 is a movie worth checking out. It doesn't exactly do anything particularly amazing, but the things it does get right, it really gets right. And it's got enough heart and soul to it that I would definitely call it a worthy sequel to Cars. Definitely more worthy than Cars 2 is, that's for sure.
If you're gonna go watch Cars 3, don't.
Man, fuck you, Logan!
More like belongs in the trash!
Toy Story 4. Oh boy, this is a controversial one. Yeah, when this movie first got announced, a lot of people were very confused. I mean, we already had the perfect ending to the trilogy with Toy Story 3, with Andy giving his toys to Bonnie and going off to college, so the existence of this movie just felt kind of unnecessary. And yeah, I do agree that this movie really didn't need to exist, but for what it is, I really don't think it's a bad movie. There's really a lot to like in here. Now, for starters, I think the biggest problem with this movie is the fact that it is called Toy Story 4, because this story is really mostly about Woody, with the other toys really just being side characters, even more so here than in the other movies, with some of them only getting a couple lines. The movie really should have been called Woody the Cowboy or something, because this movie really is his story, and I actually think that aspect of it was really beautifully done. After the events of Toy Story 3, Woody doesn't really feel like he belongs anymore. His new kid Bonnie doesn't exactly play with him, and when he reunites with Bo Peep, he starts to see that there's much more to the world than being loved by a kid. Woody's development throughout this movie is really the best part of it, and I really do like his relationship with Bo. It really feels like two exes reuniting. Though, if I were to complain about one thing, it'd be that I don't really like how they changed Bo Peep. In Toy Story 1 and 2, her personality was very soft, caring, and loving, and here they changed her to be this badass action hero with a really strong attitude. That's just not what Bo Peep was like at all in the other movies. Sure, there is a lot of time between the movies where I guess Bo Peep could have adopted a tougher personality, but I don't know, they made so many changes to her personality that she doesn't really feel like the same character anymore. They even changed her design a bit, making her face look much more like your standard Disney princess. Like, I'm not the only one who sees a little bit of Elsa in her face, right? Now, while I don't really know how to feel about Bo Peep in this movie, the other new characters they introduced are all really fun. I love Gabby Gabby and her creepy henchmen. I love Ducky and Bunny, who probably have the funniest joke in the entire franchise. This bit just always cracks me up. And Duke Kaboom is really fun too. He's also voiced by the one and only Keanu Reeves, so for that I give this movie plus 100 Reddit points. And that ending, man. I didn't think they were going to be able to top the ending of Toy Story 3. And they didn't. I still prefer how that movie ended, but I still really love this movie's ending. I love the way you can tell exactly what Woody's thinking just by looking at his face. He really wants to stay with Bo Peep, but he doesn't want to disappoint his friends. And then when Buzz says Bonnie will be okay, it's such a powerful scene. And then when all the other toys huddle around and hug Woody before all saying goodbye, it makes me so emotional. So while this movie really didn't need to exist, I'm actually pretty glad it does, because I think there's plenty of great stuff to like in here that I think it definitely makes up for its own existence. And I think it makes for a great ending to the Toy Story franchise. Fuck do you mean they're making another one?
Like, turn on the TV to hit the Pentagon!
Turning Red is a charming and fun movie, and I'm tired of pretending it's not. I don't know what some people have against this movie, it's really not that bad. It feels like ever since the trailers for this movie came out, people have kind of been hating on it, calling it such horrible words like cringe and CalArt style. I swear, if I see one more person call a bean mouth a CalArt style mouth, I am going to lose my fucking marbles. The movie follows this 13-year-old girl named May who lives in Toronto, who spends her days hanging out with her friends, fantasizing about boys, drawing, as well as helping her mother out with her family's temple, where they worship their ancestors. One day, after a very embarrassing experience, May wakes up to discover that whenever she has any strong emotions, she'll turn into a giant red panda, which is revealed to be an ability that's been passed down through all the women of the family. Now, at first, May is very distraught by this and just wants the red panda side of her to go away. However, as the plot progresses, May starts to grow more and more attached to that side of her and uses it to her advantage so she can make some money for her and her friends to go see this band they like called Four Town. The whole red panda stuff is an obvious allegory for puberty, and I think it's handled very well. The movie isn't afraid to talk about periods, crushes, and drawing porn, and it's just very refreshing to see a kids movie that isn't afraid to talk about these things. Usually kids movies just straight up avoid talking about puberty, but it really is an important thing for kids to learn about, and I think this movie handles it excellently. Really makes me wonder how Inside Out 2 is gonna handle the topic. The relationship between May and her mom is also a standout aspect of this movie. Her mom is very strict and sees May as this perfect angel who can do nothing wrong, and May is just kind of stuck in this position and can't really be her own person. But throughout the movie, we see May start to act more and more rebellious towards her mother, embracing her panda side more and more, with her even sneaking out of the house to go see the Four Town concert. Now, her mom isn't necessarily a bad person or anything, she's just very strict and wants everything to be perfect, and the reason she's like that is just because that's what her mom was like to her, and at the end of the movie, she learns to accept May for who she is. I also really love the whole setting of the movie. It takes place in Toronto, Canada in the early 2000s, and the entire movie just has this very cozy early 2000s feel to it, with a lot of little references to things that were relevant back then, such as Tamagotchis and flip phones. So overall, while I wouldn't say it's among Pixar's best movies, I still really love Turning Red. I think it's a very charming coming-of-age movie, and I definitely wouldn't mind rewatching it every now and then. But wait, they didn't mention the 9/11 terrorist attacks! Okay, I take it back. This movie gets a 0 out of 10. Fuck this stupid movie.
Johnny Worthington, president of Roar Omega Roar.
Monsters University is probably Pixar's most underrated movie. Yeah, surprisingly, this movie wasn't that liked when it came out, getting pretty mediocre reviews with a lot of critics calling the movie predictable and unnecessary. Well, you know what I say to those critics? I don't really agree with your opinion of the 2013 movie Monsters University because I thought it was quite a lovely movie. I mean, come on, this movie's got such amazing characters like Mike and Sully, the Uzma Kappa crew, Johnny Worthington, Chet. The movie is a prequel to Monsters, Inc., with it following Mike as he goes off to college to become a scarer, where he meets Sully, who he first has a rivalry with, but throughout the movie they form a bond. I really love their relationship here. In Monsters, Inc., they already did a really good job at making it seem like they've known each other for years, and here we see the beginning of that, with them learning how to work together throughout the movie. Mike is very determined and hardworking, and throughout the movie he works hard to become a scarer, even though he gets told countless times that he's not scary enough. Sully, on the other hand, relies on his natural talent and family legacy, but lacks Mike's dedication, so the two really complement each other nicely. And the other characters are really great too. Sure, the Uzma Kappa monsters can be a little cringy sometimes, but they can also be very charming, and sometimes they can even get a few laughs in. I mean, how could you not love the funny purple Charlie Day monster? Dean Hardscrabble is also an absolutely amazing antagonist. She's not exactly evil or anything, she's just very strict, and she serves as a great obstacle for Mike and Sully. She's also got just a great design, really makes her look both creepy and cool. And that scene towards the end at the water where it's just Mike and Sully talking to each other about how they feel is just such a powerful moment. And the whole message of the movie is something I think is very important too, being that sometimes even if you try your best, you're not always going to be able to get what you want. And that's okay, because there are always going to be other options out there for you. And that's exactly what happens to Mike. He tries the entire movie to become a scarer, but in the end, he's just not scary, and he needs to accept that. However, just because he doesn't become the exact thing he wanted to, doesn't mean he still can't find success in life, and I think that's a very important message, and it really elevates this movie. tell me why people hate this movie again. Oh yeah, and this movie's also got an absolute banger of a soundtrack. I mean, just listen to this!
Why are you so angry?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe because your obsession with middle schoolers!
Cars is a very interesting movie. It's definitely the movie that sticks out the most in my mind when I think back at the classic Pixar movies. I mean, the movie that came out before this one was The Incredibles, and the one that came out after was Ratatouille, two of Pixar's greatest movies of all time. So compared to those, this movie just feels... I don't want to say worse, but it's definitely different. The whole idea of this movie being about talking cars just feels very toyish. I mean, there's a reason why when this movie came out, they also released toys of pretty much every character in the movie, and I think that put a lot of people off from this movie. Many people just saw this movie as a commercial to sell Cars toys, and while I don't doubt that was a big part of it, it is also a genuinely really good movie. Now, yes, I am a little biased while saying that because I grew up with this movie, but even after revisiting this movie recently, yeah, I'd say it still holds up very well. The story is very simple. This cocky race car named Lightning McQueen is headed to California for a big race, and on his way he gets stuck in this little town called Radiator Springs where he accidentally wrecks the road, so he's then forced to repair it before he can head back on his way. However, the more time he spends in this quaint little town, the more he starts to appreciate it, and he forms bonds with a lot of the cars in the town, such as a tow truck named Mater, a sports car named Sally, as well as a retired racer named Doc Hudson, who teaches Lightning how to become an even better racer. If I were to describe this movie with one word, it would be cozy. The whole feel of this little town is just so charming. Throughout the movie, you really feel like you get to know all the characters that inhabit it, with one of the standout characters being Mater. Mater is one of those comic relief characters that you would think would get really annoying, but surprisingly, he's very charming in this movie. He's not an over-the-top idiot like he is in Cars 2, with them knowing exactly when to use him and when not to. And when they do use him, he's very funny. He probably has some of the funniest lines in the entire movie. But the standout part of this movie is undoubtedly the relationship between Lightning McQueen and Doc Hudson. Lightning's brash and self-centered personality really contrasts well with Doc, with him being much more calm and experienced, and I love how just by listening to this guy talk, you can really tell he's got a very rich past. And the way the relationship slowly builds up throughout the movie, with Doc eventually coaching Lightning during the final race, was just done perfectly, and it truly is a shame that his actor Paul Newman died between movies, because he's just perfect as the voice of Doc. So overall, while it's definitely not one of Pixar's best movies, I still absolutely love Cars, and I really think people should give it more praise. Yes, I know at this point the franchise has been run into the ground with sequels, spin-off shorts, and so many toys, but looking at this first movie on its own, it's truly a very solid movie. It might just be my nostalgia talking, but I truly do think that the first Cars movie belongs right up there with all the other Pixar classics. This is it, the movie that started everything, Pixar's first ever movie, Toy Story. This is a really good movie. Now, I don't think I need to introduce you to this movie. I mean, it's one of the most popular animated movies of all time. Blah blah blah, Grandma's Goldfish, blah blah blah. But there's a very good reason for that, because even today, I'd definitely say this movie holds up incredibly well, which is really amazing because studios' first movies usually aren't that amazing. I mean, look at Sony, known for movies like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and the Spider-Verse movies. What was their first movie? Open Season. But when it comes to Toy Story, it really is as good now as it was when it came out, which really shows you how great of a movie this is. Which honestly shouldn't have happened, because for a while the development of this movie was very rough. Yeah, in the early production of this movie, it was almost an entirely different movie, having much more of an edge to it, with Woody almost being depicted as the movie's villain. There's a bunch of test footage of this online, with the infamous Black Friday reel being the biggest example of this, where Woody was such a big jerk that Disney almost canceled the entire movie. But luckily, in the end, Pixar decided to tone Woody down for the final movie, which I definitely think was a good idea, because I truly think that this decision saved this movie, and damn, did it turn out to to be an amazing final product. Toy Story was the first feature-length 3D animated movie ever made, and it set the standard for every other 3D animated movie that would follow it, and for being the first, it still holds up amazingly today. Sure, the animation hasn't exactly aged the best, especially on the humans. Should be looking like Stravinsky in the Mysterious House. But when it comes to the story and characters, the movie holds up incredibly well. The movie takes place in a world where all toys are alive, and whenever kids aren't playing with them, they come alive and do their own things like play poker and, fuck, I guess.
What do you say I get someone else to watch the sheep tonight?
Hell yeah.
Do you think Woody had wood in this scene? The plot is very simple. The main character is this cowboy toy named Woody, who is this kid's favorite toy. Then one day he gets a new toy, being a space ranger named Buzz Lightyear, which makes Woody jealous, and then boom, conflict. The best parts of this movie is just seeing Woody and Buzz interact with each other, with Buzz being fully convinced that he is in fact an actual space ranger, with Woody trying to prove to him that he's a child's plaything. I love these two characters so much. They really bounce off each other perfectly, and the scenes of them fighting are probably some of the funniest scenes in the entire franchise. In fact, this entire movie is hilarious. It's definitely the most consistently funny Pixar movie. Sid is also just a really good antagonist. He's not necessarily evil or anything, he's just a kid who likes to experiment with toys and make horrible abominations. We all definitely knew a kid like this when we were younger, and I love how the antagonist of this movie is just a child having fun. I even kind of feel bad for him in the end. Like, come on, Sid did nothing wrong, justice for Sid. The soundtrack is also such a banger. Randy Newman's songs in this movie have been permanently etched into my brain, and I think it's the same for many other people, because both Clarence and The Simpsons both did parody versions of the songs in this movie, and I don't think people are talking about that enough.
This is the end of Bart.
So while the animation can look a bit crude at times, I still absolutely think this movie holds up today, and it is the movie that we can thank for kickstarting this entire studio.
Buzz Lightyear, cool!
Buzz Lightyear to the rescue.
Woody, I love you.
Oh yeah.
No, Woody, that's a child! Finding Nemo is just a really nice movie. It just radiates really good vibes, and it's just a really fun watch. Whenever I want to watch something that'll just make me feel all warm and fuzzy inside, this is the movie for me. You know, if you ignore that first scene where Marlin's wife gets fucking eaten. Jesus Christ, and I thought this was a kid's movie! This is not a kid's movie. This is a fish movie. The movie follows this clownfish named Marlin, who after witnessing his wife and kids die in front of him, Jesus Christ, is left with only one child, who he names Nemo. Because of this, he's very protective of Nemo and doesn't want him to do anything that'll possibly get him in danger. However, one day after an argument, Nemo is captured by a diver and put into an aquarium at a dentist's office, which leads Marlin, with the help of this other fish named Dory, to try and find Nemo and bring him back home. Oh, that's why it's called Finding Nemo. I thought it was an anagram for fuckers in no danger intentionally navigating games near endless melatonin oozers. You know, Finding Nemo actually makes more sense. You know, I wouldn't really say the movie has a real storyline, more just a setup and a payoff, and then just a bunch of other things that are happening in between. Throughout the movie, Marlin and Dory go from place to place in their search for Nemo, stumbling across many different strange places and wacky characters, like this swarm of fish, these sharks, these cool turtles, and this freaky-looking deep-sea fish. Now, when you hear the synopsis, you might think the movie will be boring, but it's really quite the opposite. Every new character they meet is really fun and interesting, with my favorite ones being the sharks. Dory is also a really fun secondary protagonist. The whole thing with her is that she's got trouble remembering things and easily forgets whatever she was talking about, which you'd think would get annoying, but I think it's handled incredibly well here. They know exactly how to use her right, and she's even got quite a lot of emotional moments too. So yeah, I really do like her character in this movie, you know, if you ignore who she's played by. I also really love all the stuff with Nemo in the aquarium. It really gives you this sense of claustrophobia, and all you want for him is just to escape. And all the other fish in the tank are really fun too. We've got this yellow fish who really loves bubbles, this French shrimp, this starfish who sticks to the glass, and this striped fish played by the GOAT Willem Dafoe. This movie is just filled with so many fun moments and characters, and it all comes together beautifully in the end. After all the dangers and obstacles our characters have gone through throughout the movie, it feels extremely satisfying to see Marlin and Nemo finally reunite in the end, and it just warms my heart to see. Wait, hold on. What if we take Marlin's name and replace the L with a... Wait, no!
Do you ever look at someone and wonder, What is going on inside their head?
Inside Out. Man, I can still remember when this movie was first coming out. It was so exciting to be a Pixar fan. You see, around the time when this movie was being released, Pixar wasn't really at the top of their game. The movies they've been releasing were mostly sequels, and even when they did make an original movie with Brave, it didn't really turn out that well. So to see Inside Out, a totally new original movie with a creative idea and charming characters, was so refreshing. After watching it in theaters all the way back in 2015, I remember liking it quite a lot. But honestly, the more I watch it, the better it gets, to the point that I like it even more now than when I was a kid. The idea of this movie is that inside everyone's minds there are 5 emotions operating them: joy, sadness, fear, anger, and cunty. I mean disgust. The movie follows these 5 emotions as they control a girl named Riley, who's moving to a new city and dealing with all the hardships that come with that. As Riley struggles with her new environment, her emotions also start to get out of balance, leading to joy and sadness getting ejected from their HQ and stranded in the depths of Riley's mind, where they need to find their way back. The movie is just really creatively done. I know the whole idea of sentient emotions isn't exactly original. I mean, this has been done 1,000 times before, but it's the way it's done here that I adore so much. Every inch of this movie is just filled with so many creative ideas that I just can't help but adore it. I love the concept of core memories and how some memories you just forget and never remember again. I love the whole idea of dreams being little movies that the emotions can watch. I love the personality islands that start to collapse as the movie goes along, and I really love the character Bing Bong. Bing Bong is supposed to be Riley's old imaginary friend who teams up with joy and sadness throughout the movie. Now, throughout the movie, he's a pretty lighthearted and goofy character. However, when Bing Bong and Joy get trapped in the memory dump, Bing Bong actually sacrifices himself to let Joy escape, which is such a well done scene. You wouldn't expect a movie like this to feature a death of such a major character, but I really respect it. There's no fake out, and he doesn't come back later in the movie either. He just stays dead, and it just makes for a really powerful scene. So yeah, overall, I'd say Inside Out is a very solid movie. Of course, it's not perfect or anything. I still think they could have given Riley a bit more personality, and for being a movie all about emotions, I didn't really think it was all that funny outside of that one really funny gum commercial bit. But compared to the other movies Pixar was releasing around this time, yeah, Inside Out was truly a return to form for Pixar, and I really do think it deserves to be seen in the same light as all the other Pixar classics. It truly is that great.
I miss my wife, Tails. I miss her a lot.
Well, now we're in the top 10 of my favorite Pixar movies, and from here on out, I think every single one of these movies are pretty much perfect. And what better movie to start the top 10 with than Up? Now, of course, I can't talk about this movie without mentioning those first 10 minutes, which many people have said is the best part of the movie. And yeah, I have to agree, it is an amazingly done sequence. We see a young boy named Carl meet this girl named Ellie, and they both get along really well because of their shared love for adventure. It then hard cuts to them as adults getting married, and what follows might just be the best and most emotional montage I have ever seen in an animated movie. We see them go through all the usual trials and tribulations any couple does, showing them buying a house, getting jobs, and eventually wanting kids. However, we then see Ellie and Carl in a hospital, with Ellie crying in front of a doctor, implying a miscarriage. However, life keeps going for the couple, with them rediscovering their love for adventure they had when they were young, so they start planning to move to a place called Paradise Falls, with them saving up money to do so. However, life keeps getting in the way, with them needing to use their saved up money for things like broken tires and broken legs. We then see them start to get older, with their dream of moving to Paradise Falls slowly starting to fade away, and eventually, Ellie gets sick, with us seeing Carl visiting her in the hospital before cutting to a scene of Carl sitting alone with a blue balloon in the same church where they got married, implying that Ellie sadly passed away. We then see Carl heading home looking sad and defeated, which is where the montage ends. Man, these 10 minutes are just so powerful. It's amazing how they're able to convey so much with no words being said at all. Yeah, this entire sequence is completely dialogue-free, with the only audio being the amazing score by Michael Giacchino, and it just makes it hit even harder. These first 10 minutes are so great that if the entire movie was just this, I still think the movie would have been great. But no, this is only the first 10 minutes of an hour-and-a-half long movie, which really showcases how amazing Pixar is at storytelling. So how is the rest of the movie? Well, while I wouldn't say anything in the movie really tops that opening sequence, I still think the movie as a whole is a really well done animated adventure movie. The rest of the movie follows Carl after he lost Ellie, where he's become very grouchy and closed off, with him clinging to any memory of his wife. One day, a construction company wants Carl to move out of his house so they can demolish it. However, Carl is having none of that, so instead, he puts a bunch of balloons on his house to fly away to Paradise Falls, which is the place where him and Ellie dreamed of living. Along the way, he also meets this Boy Scout named Russell, this bird named Kevin, and this talking dog named Doug. Yeah, the majority of this movie is definitely a lot more whimsical compared to the first 10 minutes, where everything was very grounded and serious. And I know some people may be disappointed by that, but I really enjoy the more silly and fun aspects of this movie. I mean, after hitting us with such an emotional gut punch at the start of the movie, I think the rest of it deserves to be a little more silly, and some of those emotional moments do come back later, so it doesn't really bother me too much, because the whole adventure part of this movie is just so much fun. I love the side characters, I love the villain and all the dark implications around him. I mean, the movie pretty much implies that he's killed people. That's very dark for a kid's movie. And I especially love the relationship between Carl and Russell. It is just very heartwarming, and I love how Carl almost becomes like a grandpa for him in the end. It's really good stuff. So yeah, while I would still definitely say the movie peaks in its first 10 minutes, I'd still say the rest of the movie is really good, and I'd absolutely recommend it to anyone who hasn't seen it yet.
Cause I know that I'm a gay fish, yo.
Luca is such a charming little movie. It was released back in 2021, right around when the COVID pandemic was going on, and sadly because of that, it wasn't released in theaters, and instead it was just dumped on Disney+, which led to not as many people seeing it. Which really is a shame because this is a great movie. The movie follows Luca, this little sea monster boy who dreams of going up to the surface. However, his parents forbid it, telling him that the surface is dangerous and no place for a sea monster. However, his curiosity persists, and one day he meets another sea monster named Alberto, who proceeds to show Luca what the surface is really like, with them taking on human forms when they're out of the water. The two then start to form a close bond, with them exploring more and more of this little town, eventually meeting some of the people who live in it, such as this girl named Julia, who they befriend. They also meet her father and this little cat, as well as this bully named Ercole, who's pretty much the closest thing to an antagonist in this movie. The bond between Luca and Alberto is really the heart of this story, and both of their actors do a really good job at portraying them. You really get this sense that they have a great friendship, with Alberto teaching Luca all about the human world, even though Alberto really doesn't know a lot either. They're absolutely great together, which makes it even more heartbreaking when they start bickering and fighting. You really just want them to get along. A lot of people have also pointed out the LGBTQ implications between them, with even the director of a short film based on the movie making art depicting the two as a couple. And yeah, I'd be lying if I couldn't see it too. I also love how cozy this movie feels. It's not a grand story by any means. The entire thing pretty much just takes place in this small little Italian town, and I just love movies like that. It's much more focused on the characters than the story, and that actually kind of reminds me of a Studio Ghibli movie, which is always a plus in my book. So many animated movies nowadays seem to think that they need some grand adventure to be entertaining. I'm looking at you, Garfield movie. But in reality, as long as the characters are fun, I really don't mind a smaller scale movie. It really is a shame that this movie was treated the way it was. I mean, it didn't even get a chance in theaters, which is just such a shitty move by Disney, because even fucking Lightyear got to be in theaters, but not this movie. Cause yeah, wasn't Lightyear just so good, y'all? Wasn't it just so worth it to see on the big screen? The steaming pile of trash!
Hey kids, don't you want to see Buzz Lightyear? Don't you want to see a story featuring Buzz that has absolutely nothing to do with Buzz Lightyear? Yeah! And let's make everything so bland and uninteresting! That'll surely get audiences in! Right? Right?
But yeah, Luca is really good. Check it out.
And if I was handsome...
You're green with it!
You're green with it!
Monsters, Inc. was actually one of those movies that I never really liked that much as a kid. Sure, I didn't hate it or anything, but I definitely liked Monsters University more than this one. I don't know, I suppose I just preferred the more modern animation of that movie, and I also think I connected way more with Mike than I did with Sully. However, as I've grown older, I've definitely grown to like this movie a lot more, with it now being one of my favorite Pixar movies. First of all, the whole world this movie sets up is just so well done and creative. We all remember thinking there were monsters in our closets when we were kids, and I adore the way this movie takes that idea and makes a whole world out of it. In this movie, we follow Mike and Sully, two monsters who work at a scare floor, which is pretty much where a bunch of monsters go through these magic doors to scare kids in the human world so they can extract their scream energy, which is what powers the monster world. However, one day, this little girl is let loose into the monster world, with Sully and Mike needing to get her back into the human world without anyone noticing, while also discovering who's really behind everything. The standout part of this movie is definitely Mike and Sully. I just love their dynamic here. They really did a good job at making their friendship seem genuine, and you really do get the impression that they've known each other for a long time. However, they're not best friends all of the time. They do argue and banter, and they don't always agree on things, with Mike just wanting all their troubles to be over as quickly as possible, and Sully being more caring for the girl, who he ends up naming Boo. It's also probably the funniest Pixar movie. There are so many great quotable lines here, like, "Put that thing back where it came from, or so help me," and my personal favorite,
But she can't stay here. This is the men's room.
That is the weirdest thing you have ever said.
I don't know, I just love Mike's reaction here. It just cracks me up whenever I hear it. I also love this part.
Where am I?
Where am I? The villains are also really good too. Randall is very cunning and mysterious, and I love his rivalry with Mike throughout the movie. However, for as much as I like Randall, I think the better villain here is definitely Waternoose. While Randall is more of your standard evil scheming bad guy, Waternoose is a much more realistic villain. All he really wants is to just save his company. He just has very drastic means of doing so. He's also a great twist villain. I know nowadays people are tired of seeing twist villains in pretty much every Disney movie, but I still think it's done very well here. After the reveal, he doesn't turn into a completely different character or anything. He still acts pretty much the same as he did before, just way more aggressive, which makes sense for the character. He truly thinks that what he's doing is a good thing, even if he would kidnap 1,000 children before he lets this company die. See how quotable this movie is? Like, I can't help it. Welcome to the Himalayas! See? I did it again. Snow cone? And of course, the emotional center of this movie comes with Boo. Now, Boo could have very easily been annoying. Usually when you bring in a little kid character in these kids movies, they usually bring the movie down for me. However, I feel like it's handled very well here. The idea of this cute little kid running around with all these monsters completely terrified of her is just such a funny visual, and she acts just like how a normal kid would. And of course, her and Sully's relationship is extremely powerful. At the start, Sully just wants to get rid of her, but as the movie goes along, he starts to get more attached to her, and that scene where he has to say goodbye to her is just so heartbreaking, which only makes it all the more satisfying when he gets to see her again at the end. So yeah, while I didn't really love this movie that much as a child, I've definitely grown to appreciate it a lot more as I've gotten older, and it's now one of my favorite Pixar movies.
I can't believe I have to drive all the way to work on a Saturday. All the way to work!
Toy Story 2. Now, I know this might be a little controversial because most people would say Toy Story 2 is the best Toy Story movie. However, I do happen to like 3 a little bit more. However, that's not to say that 2 isn't still a great movie, because it is! This was the first sequel that Pixar ever made, being a follow-up to the hugely successful first Toy Story movie. And did it turn out to be as good as the first movie? Nah, bro. It's even better. This movie takes pretty much everything that was great about the first movie and just expands on it. It's got higher stakes, more characters, stronger emotional moments. Everything here is just perfect. The plot follows Woody as he's kidnapped by this guy named Al, who wants to put Woody in a museum along with 3 other toys named Jessie, Bullseye, and Stinky Pete. Yeah, turns out Woody is quite the collector's item, with him being a part of this old TV show called Woody's Roundup, along with the other toys, who want Woody to come with them since the museum is only interested in buying the collection if all 4 toys are included. Meanwhile, it's up to Buzz and the other toys to go rescue Woody, while Woody himself starts to open up more and more about the idea of being immortalized forever in a museum, since that'll mean he'll always be loved by children. This movie is what I would call the perfect sequel. While other movie sequels will often just rehash the plot of the first movie, this one feels more like a continuation, and it answers a lot of questions that weren't really touched upon in the first movie. Like, what happens when a toy's owner grows up? Well, they usually give them away, and that's a very big deal for the toy, and it can actually be very traumatizing for them. We see this in the character Jessie. She had a kid who loved her for years, but eventually her kid grew up, and it left her very emotionally scarred, with her trying to convince Woody not to go back to Andy because she knows what will happen when a kid eventually grows old. I really love Jessie in this movie. While she does have a sad backstory, it's not like she's a constant downer or anything. She's a very energetic and fun character, and I really love how they decided to have her and Bullseye join the rest of the toys at the end. I also really love the villains of this movie. Technically, we got 3 antagonists here. First one being the toy store owner Al, who's responsible for stealing Woody. He's not exactly a serious threat to the characters, he's really more of an obstacle. That being said, I really love him. I don't know what it is about him, but he just cracks me up. I don't know if it's his design or his voice, but there's just something about this guy that's just so funny to me. Like, he's just a guy. Don't tell me you can't see this guy going on a Joe Rogan interview or something. The second villain is Zurg, who follows Buzz and the others around. He's definitely the villain that the movie takes the least seriously, with his entire character pretty much just being a reference to Darth Vader. That being said, I do really love his design, and he makes for a great antagonist for Buzz. Now, while I do love Al and Zurg, the standout villain in this movie is no doubt Stinky Pete the Prospector. He was the first twist villain that Pixar ever did, and I think it's done absolutely perfect here. It doesn't come out of nowhere like some other twist villains. His motivations actually makes a lot of sense, and you do see where he's coming from. Throughout the movie, he's constantly trying to convince Woody to go to the museum, with him having this very soft-spoken voice. However, when Woody starts changing his mind and wants to go back to Andy, he's presented with no other choice and starts to act more aggressive, with him changing his voice to be a lot more stern too. I really love villains like this. He's not pure evil and has very understandable motivations. It's just that he goes way too far to get what he wants, with him even threatening to tear Woody up if it means getting him to the museum. Honestly, everything in this movie is just done perfectly, not just when it comes to Woody's side of the story, but the side characters too. I love this little adventure that Buzz and the others go on to save Woody, especially when they go inside the toy store and meet up with the other Buzz Lightyear. So overall, Toy Story 2 is just a masterpiece. It expands on the world, gives the characters much more depth, and it also greatly improves the animation. However, for as much as I love Toy Story 2, it's still not my favorite Toy Story movie. That title goes to... Boy, you gotta start my motherfucking day. Toy Story 3. Now, it was very hard to choose between Toy Story 2 and Toy Story 3 for which movie I preferred. I mean, I love both these movies so much. How could I possibly choose? Well, I rewatched both movies, and after careful consideration, I've decided that 3 is my favorite. Now, do take that with a little grain of salt because I am very nostalgic towards Toy Story 3. It was the first Pixar movie I ever saw in theaters, with me only being 6 years old when I first saw it, so it holds a very special place in my heart. In this movie, we get a little time jump, with Andy now being 17 and in the middle of preparing for college. This, of course, means that the toys aren't really being played with anymore, with them grappling with the idea that their future most likely won't have Andy in it, with Andy putting his old toys in a trash bag so they can go into the attic, with him wanting to take Woody to college. However, through a mix-up, the trash bag with the toys is mistaken for actual trash, which leads the toys to start thinking of a different future for themselves, and that leads them to Sunnyside Daycare. Now, at first, Sunnyside seems like a great new place for them where they can be loved by children forever. However, as they spend more time there, they discover that it's actually a horrible prison ruled by an evil bear named Lotso, with them needing to escape. I really love this movie, even more so now than when I was a kid. Back then when I first saw it, I didn't really understand the deeper themes of it. I just liked it because I liked any colorful animated movie back then. I mean, for God's sake, one of my favorite movies back then was Impy's Wonderland. But now, I honestly connect with the movie a lot more. I've now been the same age as Andy in this movie, and I can relate to him a lot more now than when I was a kid. This movie is also a lot darker than the other Toy Story movies. I mean, after that opening scene, the rest of the movie can get pretty depressing, with the toys dealing with the fact that, well, Andy doesn't really love them the same way he used to, and they just have to deal with that. Now, I know I complained about the darker aspects of Cars 2 and The Good Dinosaur, but I think it's done much better here. I don't know, I just feel like the darker aspects fit way better for a movie like this, especially since the 2 previous movies had overall pretty lighthearted tones. This is especially present in the character of Lotso. Lotso is just such a great antagonist for this movie, probably up there with Syndrome as my favorite Pixar villain. When we first meet him, he seems like a very sweet guy, simply wanting to give the toys a warm welcome. However, as the movie progresses, Lotso's true colors are revealed, with him putting the toys among kids that are way too young for them, and when the toys protest, he locks them up to try to teach them a lesson. He's really good at manipulating people, and throughout the movie, we see just how much of a control freak he really is, which only makes us hate him more. And what I really love is that the movie never tries to redeem him or anything. He gets one chance to be a better person after Woody saves him. However, he doesn't take it and simply runs away, leaving the other toys to die, showing that deep down, Lotso is simply just a coward. And sometimes it's nice to have a character in a movie who's just evil and gets what he deserves in the end. I love all the other new characters too. Bonnie's toys are all really fun, and I love how this one character treats being played with like he's playing a role in a play. I love this creepy monkey who scared the shit out of me when I was a kid, and I especially love Ken. Oh fuck, those were vintage! Definitely has to be up there with my top 10 favorite Pixar lines. You know, next to, I'll kidnap 1,000 children before I let this company die.
Don't feed me any more lines from Monsters, Inc. It pisses me off.
Honestly, there isn't really anything in this movie that I dislike. It's got the perfect amount of peril, comedy, and character growth, and I absolutely love the ending of this movie where Andy says goodbye to his toys. It's a very powerful scene, and it serves as the perfect ending for this franchise. You know, I don't hate Toy Story 4 or anything, I think it's a perfectly fine movie. However, I do admit that Toy Story 3 is where it should have ended, because this movie is undoubtedly my favorite Toy Story movie. Fuck you, Ellis Mark.
Can a robot turn a canvas into a beautiful masterpiece?
I ain't had my wee sucked properly in a few months.
WALL-E.
That the Wally movie?
No, not you, WALL-E.
No, that the Wally movie.
WALL-E is such a beautiful fucking movie, dude. This film just encapsulates everything I love about Pixar. It's got beautiful animation, great characters, and a message that's more relevant now than ever. The movie has a very simple story, following this little robot named WALL-E who's tasked with cleaning up Earth after it became too polluted to live on, with all remaining humans being on a voyage deep in space. One day, however, WALL-E encounters Eve, a sleek white robot sent by the humans to find signs of life, who WALL-E slowly starts to fall in love with. Then, when Eve finds a plant that WALL-E's been keeping, she takes it so she can take it back to the humans and show the captain, with WALL-E following her, leading them both to the giant ship, the Axiom, where all humans now live. The highlight of this movie, to me, is definitely WALL-E himself. He is just so likable, and I love how even though he's just a robot, he can still have feelings, with him dreaming of one day finding someone to love, which is just so adorable. It's amazing how much they can make us connect with this silly little robot, and I especially love the first part of the movie, where we simply see WALL-E as he goes about his everyday activities, sorting trash, replacing his own parts, and also collecting any little doodads and gadgets he can find. Yeah, he's quite a little collector, with him having his own little home where he puts all the things he finds, which, you know, I can relate to. WALL-E is the autism representation we needed. And they do an amazing job at making you feel attached to WALL-E even though he barely says a word. You can always tell what he's feeling, and I'm so happy that they decided to go this route because any other animation studio probably would have given him some sort of annoying celebrity voice, but they keep his words to a minimum, and I really respect that. And his relationship with Eve is just so cute. I really love these two. At first, when Eve arrives on Earth, WALL-E is very afraid of her, but also curious, and as the story progresses, they start to form a strong bond, which eventually transforms into love, and oh my god, it is just the most adorable thing ever. Honestly, I could just watch an entire movie of these two just hanging out on Earth, but of course, there's also the second half of this movie which takes place in space, which I also really love. Now, a thing that many people have said about this movie is that after WALL-E and Eve get on the Axiom, the movie kind of falls off. Yeah, that first part of the movie on Earth is generally considered to be the best part, where it's just WALL-E and Eve with barely any dialogue. And while, yeah, I do agree that the beginning part of the movie is easily the best part, I still really love the rest of the movie. It's just got so many fun and creative ideas that I just can't help but love it. The entire ship is just so well designed. I love how sleek everything looks and how they basically got everything a human could ever want on the ship, with all humans now being obese and utilizing these hover chairs and robots to do everything for them, using these little screens to get whatever they want, which, you know, is starting to sound more and more like our own world. Yeah, it's not hard to figure out what the message of this movie is, but it is a very important one. Taking care of our environment is a very important subject in the modern world, and I think it's great to have a movie like this that shows us what the possible consequences of that could be, especially in a movie that a lot of kids are gonna watch. And it's not like the message is shoved down our throat or anything, it's still very much in the background, with the main focus of the movie being WALL-E and Eve's relationship and making sure this plant is kept safe. Everything in this movie is honestly just perfect. I love the characters of Wally and Eve, and I love all the other humans and silly robots they meet. The animation is also absolutely stunning, and it is so visually pleasing, especially in that one scene where Wally and Eve are flying around together out in space. The only real weak part of this movie I can think of is the villain Otto, but even then, I don't really think he's a terrible villain or anything. He's just not as strong as some of Pixar's other villains. That being said, he's still a pretty good antagonist, and I especially love his voice. So yeah, in general, WALL-E is just a really great movie, and it is absolutely a Pixar classic. Me and the bad bitch I pulled by being autistic.
Haha! Man, I'm dead.
Coco is so good, you guys. It's actually unbelievable. This movie came out in the late 2010s, when Pixar wasn't exactly pumping out as many classics as they had been in the 2000s. The last great movie they had made was Inside Out, but after that, all we got was, Finding Dory, Cars 3, The Good Dinosaur? Don't make me laugh. So yeah, it was very refreshing to see Pixar finally make something that looked great again, but not even I could have predicted just how great this movie would turn out to be. In this movie, we follow Miguel, a Mexican boy who absolutely loves music. However, he lives in a family that forbids it, since his great-great-grandfather was a musician who abandoned his family. But Miguel still plays music in secret, being inspired by a famous musician named Ernesto de la Cruz, who Miguel starts to think might actually be his great-great-grandfather. After an event where his grandmother destroys his guitar, however, he decides to run away from home, and finds the guitar of Ernesto, which he decides to play on. Now, it turns out this actually sends him to the spirit world, where he meets a bunch of his deceased relatives who all appear as spirits. They proceed to take him to the land of the dead, where he finds out he needs a family member's blessing to return to the land of the living before he becomes trapped in the land of the dead forever. However, none of the family members want to give him their blessing without him also giving up music forever, which leads Miguel to try and find Ernesto instead, so he can get his blessing but also continue to play music. Along on his journey, he also teams up with this guy named Hector, who it turns out actually has some connections to Ernesto himself, and later in the movie, we also find out he has some ties to Miguel as well. The characters are definitely a standout in this movie, especially Miguel. He is just such a likable protagonist. He's very determined and passionate about the things he loves, and you absolutely understand how frustrating it must be for him to grow up in a household where music is completely forbidden. You really do sympathize with him a lot. He very easily could have ended up being your standard whiny kid like Arlo from The Good Dinosaur, but they did an excellent job at making him likable, and all the things he does in this movie are exactly what a kid his age would do. Honestly, all of the characters here are pretty much perfect. I love Hector and his relationship with Miguel and the twist of him actually being his great-great-grandfather. I love all the members of Miguel's extended family. I love the funny fucking dog. And I also really love the twist villain, Ernesto de la Cruz. Yeah, this is yet another Pixar movie with a twist villain, but it's definitely one of the better ones. At the start of the movie, Ernesto is depicted as this really beloved figure who Miguel idolizes. However, as the story unfolds, Miguel discovers the dark truth about Ernesto's past, revealing him to actually be the one who killed Hector. He's just such a fun villain. He can be diabolical, but also very manipulative, and you really do feel the impact of his betrayal. I also love how he dies by getting fucking crushed by a giant fucking bell like Puss in Boots.
Isn't that the way that Puss in Boots died too, by a bell?
The animation is also absolutely stunning. This might honestly be Pixar's best looking movie. The whole Land of the Dead is just so visually stunning. I love the way everything is designed with these bright colors and neon lights. It gives the world so much life and whimsy. You can really tell the creators of this movie did an excellent job studying Mexican culture. And the emotional moments of this movie hit so fucking hard. The flashback scene where we see Hector singing to his daughter Coco always gets me teary-eyed, even more so when Miguel later sings the same song to Coco, who's now an old woman. It is an extremely powerful scene, and it's one of the many reasons why I love this movie so much. It truly is a masterpiece, and I don't think anyone could have guessed that the funny skeleton movie would be this good.
Did somebody say skeleton?
What color is the sky? Ay, mi amor, ay, mi amor. What color is the sky? Ay, mi amor, ay, mi amor. What color is the sky? Ay, mi amor, ay, mi amor. What color is the sky? Ay, mi amor, ay, mi amor. What color is...
Get out! Oh.
English, motherfucker! Do you speak it?
The Incredibles is pretty much everything you could ever want from a movie and then some. It's got great characters, great action, a great story. Everything in here is just pretty much perfect. The movie follows this family of superheroes called the Parr family. They all have their own unique powers. The dad, Bob, has super strength. The mom, Helen, can stretch her body, the daughter, Violet, can turn invisible and use force fields, and the son, Dash, has super speed. However, since superpowers are outlawed, they have to keep it a secret, with Bob being stuck at a boring office job, with him often reminiscing about what his life was like before superpowers were outlawed. One day, however, he gets a mysterious invitation to a secret mission on an island, which he ends up saying yes to, hoping to relive the glory days of being a superhero. However, it turns out this was all just a trap set up by the movie's villain, Syndrome, who's been holding a grudge against Bob ever since he dismissed him as a sidekick when he was a child. What I love about this movie is just how real the characters feel. Even though they're superheroes, they're still people, and they all have their own distinct personalities and struggles they need to overcome. Violet, for example, is very shy and struggles a lot with her own confidence. Dash, on the other hand, is almost too confident and struggles a lot with the restrictions that his parents and society put on him since he's not allowed to use his powers. Helen simply wants to keep her family together, with her dealing with the reckless actions of her husband as well as trying to foster their baby Jack. But the focus on this movie is of course on Bob, aka Mr. Incredible himself. You really feel Bob's frustration with his current life. Yes, he loves his family, but he also misses his days of being a superhero, with him often sneaking out to fight crime along with his buddy Lucius, played by L. Jackson. But then when Bob goes to the island and realizes what's really going on, he starts to regret his actions. Now, of course, I can't talk about the characters of this movie without talking about what might be the best Pixar villain ever made. That, of course, being Syndrome. Syndrome is just the most diabolical, pathetic villain ever, and I absolutely love him. His entire motivation for doing what he does in this movie is just because Mr. Incredible said "fly home, buddy" to him as a child. That is just so petty, and the fact that he wants Mr. Incredible dead so badly just because of this really shows how pathetic he is. For fuck's sake, it's revealed later in the movie that he's killed multiple other superheroes just to get revenge on Mr. Incredible, in this scene that might just be one of the most bone-chilling scenes in any Pixar movie. But just because he's pathetic doesn't mean he's not terrifying. He just has this sadistic aura about him that always makes you wonder what he's about to do next. And the fact that he sees no problem in killing this entire family just to get what he wants really shows how messed up he is. And of course, we've got his death scene, which is just really brutal, especially for a Pixar movie. In an earlier scene, Bob goes to his designer friend Edna Mode to ask for a new suit, where he says he wants a cape. However, Edna says no because of the risks having a cape could have, and here we see exactly what that risk is, with Syndrome getting his cape stuck in his own plane's engine, which he gets sucked into and dies. It is a very brutal death, but I think it's an appropriate one since he's been so evil and so sadistic for the entire movie. Of course, there are many other great characters here too. Edna Mode is always really funny, Mr. Incredible's boss has so many quotable lines, and Frozone is really cool. Pun intended. So yeah, this movie is pretty much the most perfect superhero movie you can make. My only critiques of it are very small, like how the animation hasn't really aged the best, and how it doesn't really focus on the family as a whole until the second half, but those are really just minor nitpicks, because overall, this movie is just incredible. Pun intended again.
Tell me about the color of your soul.
Yes, Soul is genuinely this good. I'm dead serious. Emphasis on dead. Soul is definitely the most philosophical movie Pixar has ever made. It's honestly more of a movie for adults than for kids. I mean, yeah, there's nothing in here that's inappropriate for younger audiences, but I don't think kids would really understand the themes and messages of this movie the same way adults do. And that extra level of maturity is one of the reasons why I love this movie so much. It deals with quite a lot of heavy subject matter. I mean, the entire plot revolves around death, with us following this middle school music teacher named Joe Gardner, who after landing a gig with a famous jazz musician named Dorothea Williams, falls down a manhole and dies. He then ends up in the afterlife, and after trying to escape, he ends up in the grade before, which is where undeveloped souls get prepared to be sent to Earth. Joe tries to get back into his own body, with him teaming up with this mischievous soul named 22, who doesn't see any point in being alive. Joe does manage to get back to Earth. However, through a mishap, he's accidentally put into the body of a cat, with 22 being put in his body. It is then up to Joe to find a way to get back into his own body, while 22 starts to learn about what being alive really means. I love almost everything this movie does. The way it tackles such heavy concepts like life and death while also making it fun and whimsical is really something to be commended, and it really is a movie that only Pixar could have made. It's not exactly a very marketable movie. The focus is less on the actual adventure of getting Joe back into his own body, and more on simple, raw human emotions, and the moments where the movie just stops and goes a little slower and we just spend time with the characters talking to each other are really the best parts of the movie. The two main characters contrast each other beautifully. Joe is someone who already knows what his reason for living is, being his love for music. For his entire life, he's wanted nothing more than to just be part of a jazz band. However, when he finally gets that opportunity, he dies, and he doesn't want to move on because he feels like his life just started. 22, on the other hand, is someone who doesn't see any reason for living, and would rather not exist than be on Earth. However, when she ends up in Joe's body, she starts to appreciate life a lot more, simply enjoying the small things in life, like eating pizza and listening to music. Yeah, the majority of this movie is really just focused on Joe and 22 on Earth, with the story not really progressing that much, but I absolutely love that. I love a movie that can just slow down for a bit and have characters just talk to each other about how they're feeling. We really don't need constant action or peril. Sometimes it's nice to just let characters exist, and there's so many scenes in this movie that do that. For example, the barbershop scene. This is definitely one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie. Joe needs to get a haircut, so he goes to his local barbershop, and since 22 is in his body, she ends up experiencing an actual human interaction for the first time. The barber, Des, is an old friend of Joe's, and their conversation starts off light and casual. However, 22 takes the conversation in a new direction, asking deeper and more personal questions. Des then starts talking about his own dreams and struggles, showing a side of him that Joe never really noticed before. It's something that we often take for granted. Everyone has their own lives, their own families, their own dreams. Des doesn't just exist for the purpose of being a barber, and Joe doesn't just exist to be a jazz player either, even though that's what he believes. This gives him sort of a new perspective on other people, and it's emphasized even further in the scene where he talks to his mom. This is just such a well done scene. I love how it transitions from Joe as a cat sitting on 22's shoulders telling her what to say, to Joe actually talking to his mother with 22 inside his body. He explains his passion for jazz and why it means so much to him, but he also listens to his mom's concerns for the first time, truly understanding her worries about his future, while also letting her know that jazz is what he's truly passionate about, and that if he died today, he thinks his life would have amounted to nothing. He truly thinks that if he gets to play with Dorothea Williams, he will have found his purpose in life, so he rushes 22 to get him back in his body, telling her that the reason she's starting to appreciate life more is only because she's in his body, leading to them splitting ways. And when he finally does get back into his body, he rushes to the jazz club where he finally gets to play with Dorothea Williams. This is what he's wanted for the entire movie, and then he finally gets what he wants. But after it's all over, he feels the same. He thought that doing this would finally give him the meaning of life he's been searching for, but it simply doesn't, and he's just left feeling kind of empty. Dorothea Williams then goes up to him and says what might be my favorite line in the entire movie.
I heard this story about a fish. He swims up to this older fish and says, I'm trying to find this thing they call the ocean. The ocean, says the older fish, that's what you're in right now. This, says the young fish, this is water. What I want is the ocean.
This metaphor really hits close to home for Joe, and when he goes home, he thinks about his time with 22 and how she seems so fascinated with the small things in life. It's then that he realizes that the small things in life is really what makes it worth living in this very powerful scene where he plays the piano. Soul is an incredibly beautiful movie, and I can't stretch that enough. You'd think with all the heavy subject matter, the movie would get a little too much, but the heavier stuff is balanced perfectly with the overall hopeful and positive vibes of this movie. You just feel so good after you watch it. It's got amazing characters, really stunning animation, and a message that I think is important for everyone to hear. It truly is one of Pixar's best movies. However, there is one that I like just a little bit more.
You have Wreck-It Ralph, you have Frozen, you have Ratatouille.
Ratatouille may not be everyone's favorite Pixar movie, but it is absolutely mine. Sure, there are things you can pick apart and nitpick about this movie, but I really don't care about those small flaws, and I just can't help but have a huge smile on my face every time I watch it. I love this movie through and through. It truly encapsulates everything I think a movie should be, and every time I put it on, I just can't help but be in awe of how they crafted such a beautiful movie out of such an outlandish concept. Here we follow this little rat named Remy. His passion in life is food, and what he wants more than anything in life is simply to cook. But uh-oh, he's a rat and rats can't go near humans. That is until he gets separated from his family and ends up in the beautiful city of Paris, where he finds himself in the very kitchen of his idol, Chef Gusteau. Here, Remy's journey truly begins, as he forms a friendship with Linguini, a clumsy garbage boy who can't cook to save his life. Throughout their friendship, Remy is able to pursue his passion, while Linguini can enjoy all the praise that comes with being seen as a great cook. The movie is really divided into two halves, one focusing on Remy and his family, and the other focusing on what goes on inside the restaurant, with Linguini trying his best not to give away his secret, while the head chef Skinner figures out that Linguini might actually be Gusteau's son. Remy himself is basically as likable of a protagonist as you can get. He's really fascinated with anything that has to do with food, and every scene where we see him cook is just a delight to see. Just by the way he moves, you can really tell just how passionate he is about cooking. He almost treats it like a dance, pouring ingredients and adding spices with ease, and it's all animated beautifully. I also really love when we get to see the world from his perspective. Since he's a small rat, everything looks way bigger than it is for us, and I love the way they make the kitchen look so huge from his perspective, almost making it look like a whole world in itself. His relationship with Linguini is also really well done. I love how they work off each other, even though one of them can't even talk to the other. I love that they decided to keep Remy silent around Linguini. If this was made by any other studio, they probably would have made Remy straight up talk to him, but I think it was for the best to keep him as just a regular old rat. It really makes their bond feel a lot more special, and it also really enhances the humorous scenes, as well as the more dramatic scenes. Linguini himself is of course also great. He's very clumsy and awkward, and while that does of course lead to a lot of humor, it's also surprisingly relatable, especially when he faces the pressure of living up to the legacy of his father. All the other characters are great too. I really adore how all of the other chefs have their own distinct backstories and personalities. They're all surprisingly memorable, even though they don't really have that many lines. Chef Skinner is also absolutely hilarious. Sure, he's not the most intimidating villain Pixar has ever crafted, but he's definitely one of the funniest. His almost obsessive determination to find this rat always cracks me up, and slowly throughout the movie, he just starts to act more and more insane, and I just love seeing all the people around him react as he says more and more outlandish things. But the standout character in this movie is without a doubt Anton Ego. Ego is a food critic who takes his job very seriously, and his standards are very high for every restaurant he reviews, having previously given Gusteau's restaurant such a bad review that it was probably the thing that killed him. And when Ego is preparing to visit the restaurant again, you really feel the pressure and anticipation in all the characters, because if they make something that he doesn't like, that'll most likely mean the end of the restaurant. And when they finally make the dish, being Ratatouille, they bring it out to him, expecting to hear the worst. But then, the unexpected happens. He actually likes the dish. As soon as he takes his first bite, he is shaken to his core, with it reminding him of the ratatouille that his mom used to make. This is one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and the monologue that follows it is easily one of my favorite scenes from any movie. For the entire movie, Ego has been presented as very stern and creepy, but here we finally see his humanity sneak through, showing that even the most critical and judging people can still be inspired by others, and I think that's very beautiful. I will always love this movie. It's got such a perfect mix of great characters, funny comedy, gorgeous animation, and a perfect message, being that no matter where you're from, you can still achieve great things. Ratatouille isn't just my favorite Pixar movie, it's one of my favorite movies, period. And I'd be surprised if Pixar makes anything that's as good as this movie anytime soon.
Well, that was the ranking. What did you guys think?
I think you should go outside.